basis and a presentation that my colleague Paige and I did for the Faculty of Law. We had a workshop for all of the frontline workers and some of the profs. And it's really surprising like how little people know of Aboriginal, whatever, anything. Is anybody part Aboriginal themselves? Okay, all right. I guess we just get started. Basically, my position, I work at the First People's House. Has anybody been over there? Did anybody see our powwow or go to our powwow yesterday? So yeah, it's like our busiest weeks. We just had our busiest week. Next week we have an Aboriginal Awareness Week. It's the second annual event. So we're always going to tack an awareness week onto the powwow. So there'll be a lot of opportunities for you guys to learn further. I can show you a website, but I want to get through this. I don't know if a lot of it will be exactly relevant, but I'll go through it anyway. So that's my colleague Paige. I don't know if any of you know her. She's the coordinator of the First People's House. So normally we're doing a presentation together. So I guess the overview is to learn more about, I mean, there's always an awareness component. People, and it's, you know, kind of the fault of the education system. Nobody really knows very much at all. So we end up talking about the basics, just get on the same page with everybody. So, you know, basically, these are some of the goals that we're going to be going over. And obviously, you guys are welcome and invited to ask me any questions along the way. So I just want to get an idea from you guys. Who are Aboriginal people? Does anybody have any definitions? Yep. Yep. Anybody else? Can add to that? All right. How many Aboriginal people are there in Canada?
1 million?
1 million? Anybody else? Any other guesses? Couple hundred thousand. Any other states? Ballpark.
50,000.
50,000? Okay. How many First Nations communities are in Canada?
Thousands.
Thousands? Hundreds? Anybody else? How many different languages are Aboriginal languages are in Canada?
50.
50? Anybody else? How many nations are in Quebec, our home province? Anybody know?
5.
5?
Totally guessing.
12? Okay. And what is the average age of Aboriginal people in Canada?
30.
30? All right. And this is just a little bonus. Has anybody seen this? Does anybody know what this is? It's also curious. No. Okay. All right. You're right. In Canada, there's First Nations, Inuit and Métis, but there's also a category that's called non-status. There's a huge chunk of people who they don't have status, they still are Aboriginal. I mean, so in terms of the population of Aboriginal people in Canada, in the 2006 census, so the census that happened last year, all those figures aren't going to come out until next year. So based on the 2006 census, there are 1.1 million Aboriginal people, give or take. In terms of First Nations communities in Canada, there are 650 actual communities, okay? In terms of the languages, now that's defining like an individual nation. 50, as you had said, Kate, spot on. In Quebec, there are 11 nations, all right? And the average age of Aboriginal people in Canada is around 26 years old. This is a very important piece of history. It's called the Hiawatha Wampum Belt. Does anybody know, have you guys heard of wampum? Maybe? Okay, so wampum, for Aboriginal people, not all groups, but particularly the ones from this area, used wampum. So wampum are shells from a quahog shell that are used to create belts, and these belts are encoded messages. So basically, because we didn't have a written language, all of our important things that needed to be documented were encoded into wampum belts. So for example, there's a treaty, or if there's a marriage, or some kind of an agreement, that was all written in belts. So there's a huge historical collection in the Port Museum, for example. But this one in particular is an ancient symbol, and it's the most important symbol for Iroquois people. So Iroquois people, we call ourselves Haudenosaunee, which means people of the Longhouse. And this is a symbol of the founding of our confederacy. So have you guys heard of the Iroquois? Okay, so originally there were 5 nations of the Iroquois. Today we're known as the 6 nations of the Iroquois. Basically, as you go from west to east, the confederacy consisted of and this is meant to represent the Seneca Nation, this is the Cayugas, this is the Onondagas, and they were the capital of the confederacy. This is the Oneida Nation, and here on the eastern door are the Mohawk Nation. So you are on traditional Mohawk territory. If you go to Ganawagin, just across the river where the reserve is, you'll see a giant flag flying. And all the Haudenosaunee communities across the U.S. and Canada, you'll see this flag. This is on the cars, it's in tattoos, it's now our flag. It's a supremely important symbol for all Iroquois people. So you might see that down the road. So, as I had mentioned, the 2006 census has a big chunk of people who are considered non-status. So that's kind of a pie chart. I'm interested to see the breakdown in the next information that gets released. So, terminology. I usually run through a litany of like almost 10 different things to describe myself, because I happen to be, for a lot of people, including students like yourself at McGill, the first native that they've ever met, because they're coming from overseas. And first and foremost, primarily, I'm Mohawk and Lakota. I grew up in the United States, born and raised in the U.S. I have a U.S. passport. My mom's Lakota. They're a tribe they're also in Canada, but mostly in the Dakota, South Dakota, North Dakota. My father's Mohawk from Ganawagin. So on the American side, I'm an American Indian. I'm also called a Native American. And in Canada, First Nations, I'm Aboriginal. We don't really use Aboriginal. We're still using Indian. Whereas in Canada, Indian is considered archaic. And in fact, the Department of Indian Affairs has last year changed themselves. They evolved to become the Department of Aboriginal Affairs in Northern Development. So, we have, there's a lot of different ways. But if you ask any Aboriginal person today, and there's a big wide range of, people who are born and raised in communities where their language and culture and perspective is still intact, and there's some who are far removed. They still consider themselves, because they have a heritage and they have some connection, people still identify as Aboriginal. But most people like to identify themselves by their nation's name. This is just a breakdown of where the Inuit people are. So the Inuit are fundamentally different from the rest of the Aboriginal people down in the south, down here. Has anybody been up north? No. So it's like a lot of ice. Nothing really grows. Like I said, fundamentally different. Like we're agricultural based here. Then they have to go hunt on the ice, on the water. They have more in common with their relatives in Siberia and Greenland than they do with us Aboriginal people in the south. So they're distinctly different from us. And that's why they have their own categorization as Inuit. Has anybody heard of Métis? Yep, okay. That's a kind of a vague definition today. In fact, I know people who consider themselves as capital M Métis and little m Métis. And even as an Aboriginal person, it's still a bit of a mystery. I'm not really sure. There's a few definitions you can find that are legally defining who is Métis. Basically, it's a mixture of a European descendant of Europeans and Indians. see Métis people all across Canada. In Quebec, we don't have a federally recognized land base, so there's no Métis reserve. There are Métis Nation like settlements, primarily out in the plains. Yeah.
Sir, in terms of legal status in Canada, is there a definition?
They do. There is a legal definition, but it's really vague. I think I might actually have it in another slide, but they're definitely in their own category legally, but they don't have the same status as First Nations people or Inuit. We're all distinct. And then here are where the First Nations people are. So this refers to reserved communities, so defined territorial land base of those 50 or so nations. In Quebec, we have 11. So we Mohawks are way down here. And then Quebec is really, really pretty huge. I'm proud to say that at McGill, in the last 10 years, we've had all but 2 of these nations represented here in the student body. We're a very small population here at McGill, in terms of the Aboriginal students. Fastest growing demographic in Canada. It's true, we were almost obliterated with the settlers arriving with their guns and their germs. 80 to 90% decline. But in the last century, we've really rebounded. And now we're the fastest growing demographic. Very young population. As you can see, there are a lot of factors. Aboriginal people tend to have babies younger. It's not stigmatized to have a baby, when you're a younger woman. It's really encouraged. Whereas, in a lot of society, in Western society, you really go for it. You get your career, you get your whole life set up, then you have your family. It's usually the opposite for Aboriginal people. I mean, that's kind of a general term. So I have some photos here, along with some of the stats. Basically, the population is growing 6 times faster than the non-Aboriginal population in a 10-year period, as you can see. And we are doing a lot to really promote post-secondary education. That's my primary job. I serve as a McGill recruiter, so I go out with the recruitment team, I travel across Canada, but I also do a lot of outreach to communities, to schools, inner cities, unreserved, northern, southern. We have an initiative here. Has anybody heard of the Eagle Spirit High Performance Camp? Yeah. So every year we have a camp. This is kind of all the campers get a sweatshirt. And we spend 3 days here at McGill. We collaborate primarily with medicine. We get to take the kids to the simulation center and the anatomy lab. It's like a half and half split between academics and athletics. So, we partnered up with dentistry, law, with several different faculties, but really trying to sensitize youth to think about going to school, whether it's here or somewhere else. We're really working towards getting this population, this young population, into thinking how they can make their contribution in the world. Has anybody seen any of the 8 Fire productions on CBC? Fantastic resource for you guys to learn. There's so much going on in the site. We have a couple of different clips. They're really short. Oh, I want to show you. We have sound, would you, eh?
Yeah, we should. They're
I just got it plugged in.
yeah, through the projector.
So I highly recommend. There's 4 main documentaries and then a ton of little vignettes. So under Aboriginal 101. I want to show you this. This is a good kind of intro. It's really short. maybe only here.
Yeah,
I heard the sound.
Did you?
yeah.
What went wrong? It wasn't always like this when we started down the path. When the settlers first arrived, the natives welcomed them and helped them out. It wasn't like they showed up and the natives said, "Uh-oh, there goes the neighborhood." And the relationship grew stronger, fashionable even. Remember these? It's a beaver hat. This was considered cool back in the day. That's right, our rodents were all the rage in 17th century Europe. That led to the fur trade. Of course, the fur trade gave us Canada. For a time, the Aboriginal people had this warm and fuzzy feeling, love and understanding. We documented that in wampum belts like this one, that depict two canoes traveling down the river in parallel paths, neither one interfering with the other. Cute, eh? And the English and French, well, for their part, they signed all sorts of big agreements with great seals. Ever since the Royal Proclamation of 1763, there's been banner promises like, the natives will not be molested. Or my personal favorite, the Queen's promise to the Cree of bounty and benevolence. You know, we Aboriginal people thought we were getting a seat at the big table. But it turns out we had a reservation at a much smaller table, out the back, near the garbage cans. At the big table, they got Canada and all of its bounty. At our table, a total lack of benevolence. We got the plague, a plague of whiskey, and our parents and grandparents were molested in schools designed to kill the Indian in the child. So where did all of that go wrong? Well, step into my office, grab a seat on the big couch. Let's talk.
So, and then there's just one more small letter.
It's not just another camera, it's the one.
So I hope that you guys take some time to look into this website to see more of these.
Hey Canada, I'm Wap Canoe. I know I'm not your boyfriend, but I don't mind being your man on the side. But for this thing to work, there's 5 things you're going to have to stop saying about my people. First thing, alcohol. The big thing that separates us here isn't the alcohol, it's the poverty. Because when a non-native person passes out, they do it at a curling club or at a Nickelback concert. But when a native person does, they do it on the street, which is shameful, but also comfortable. Then there's this whole idea of get over it. You know, why don't you guys just get over it? You know what? I am over it. My dad was raised in a residential school by a nun. I'm over it. But it doesn't mean that we should forget it. Then there's the long hair thing. You know, some Aboriginal people do wear their hair long as a symbol of cultural pride. Those are the natives with beautiful, long, straight hair. For curly-haired Ojibwe such as myself, hair clippers have been the greatest invention of the white man since the mirror. Then, I often hear this question. What are you guys doing with the $7 billion? $7 billion we give Indian Affairs, what are you guys doing with it? You know what, that money has to pay for a population the same size as New Brunswick. You know what New Brunswick spends on their population? $8 billion. And yet I never hear Canadians ask, hey New Brunswick, what are you doing with your $8 billion? Finally, one of your favorites, taxes. Guess what? I'm a status Indian, I pay income tax, I pay sales tax, I once even paid a land transfer tax. Ironic. It's all part of a much larger stereotype. The Aboriginal people in Canada are getting a free ride. 140 years after the treaties, we're still waiting for the things that we were promised in those agreements to share the land. So I ask you, who's really getting the free ride?
Okay. All right. So, certainly encourage you guys to see, just Google 8 Flyer CBC and you'll find this whole lineup of documentaries that are really, really good to inform yourself more on Aboriginal everything. So, some of the key themes that we don't really have to address, the alcohol issue, there's a lot of poverty and shame. The residential schools. There was an apology by Prime Minister Harper in 2008. Has anybody heard of that? Yeah, a couple people. Okay. Now, actually, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been, I don't know how long it's been going. This week was the final deadline for any residential school survivor to file a, I guess it's a claim. So there's compensation provided for those people who suffered a lot. I mean, it's a whole completely different, giant topic. I'll touch on it a little bit more. Like what you mentioned, there's $7 billion provided to First Nations communities. Taxes, you know, it's that's one of the things that a lot of people are asking me as well. Do you pay tax? And yeah, I mean, we do pay taxes. Basically, if I live and work on the res, my income is not taxable. So that's the only situation. If I work off the res, I got to pay income tax. There's status and non-status Indians, reserve and urban Indians. And actually, half of the Aboriginal population, more than 50%, live in urban settings. So a lot of them have left the traditional territorial homelands to move into cities. So those are just some of the things that are brought out there. Has anybody heard of the Indian Act? Yep. This is the legislation. It's a bit archaic. It's made in 1876. It went into effect in 1876. It's the legislation that outlines how we as Native people are administered as wards of the Canadian state. So it's evolved, but you still see, you hear a lot of stories, you just know there's been a lot of tension between the Native people and the government. This really has profoundly affected a lot of people. Like, for example, the Iroquois people are a matrilineal, matriarchal, matrilocal society. The Indian Act, completely different patriarchal frame of structure. So for Iroquois people, the real people who are in charge are the clan mothers. So the Mohawks, for example, have 3 clans. You have the Wolf Clan, Bear Clan, and Turtle Clan. And they all have a group of clan mothers. Historically, traditionally, they were the ones who owned title to all the land. They could install or depose chiefs. They kept check and balances on the power of the men. So with the Indian Act, for example, it imposed a band council system, and for a while it was only until like the 1970s in Kahnawake, for example. There were no women who could be chiefs. So, you know, fundamentally, like, shifted the value system. There's a lot of confusion that is ensued, and it leads to a large source of tension today. I mean, it's kind of crazy. This is a letter. Let's see. I mean, I don't want to read the whole thing to you, but I'll give you this presentation, and you guys can look at it a little bit more closely. But it just gives you an idea of, you know, how the Department of Indian Affairs was communicating with the Indian agent, because each community had an Indian agent, and so you had to get permission to leave the reservation from the Indian agent. You lost your Indian status if you got a university education. You weren't allowed to vote. You weren't even citizens. Indians were not citizens of Canada until 1949. Anyway, so just reading the letter, you see kind of the tone of like how the agent and the Indian Affairs were trying to manage the Indian problem. So residential schools, it's a very big topic today. I mean, it has been. It's only come out to light. This is a picture of a young boy who went through that system back in the 1870s. There's generally, there's so many people were taken away and they weren't allowed to really come home very long at all. It was really meant to kill the Indian but save the man. It was kind of the buzzword. And it's led to, it's crossed the generations of a lot of communities. So there's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Aboriginal Human Foundation that have been working with these particular people and their descendants. There was in the 1960s, a lot of kids were like literally stolen away from their families, literally, like taken, forcibly taken, without knowledge or consent. So it was between 1960 and 1990, over 11,000 youth were taken forcibly. And then a lot of them were put into non-Indian homes. There's actually a play going on right now, and it's part of the Aboriginal Awareness Week. It's playing for 2 weeks until the end of September at the Alexa Theater in Parc La Fontaine. It's called Where the Blood Mixes, and it's a really good play. It won the Governor's General Award in 2009, and it's being produced, it's being shown, it's being played at this playhouse. If you look on the website, you'll be able to see it. It's good. I went to the opening night. It's actually very good. You can find a lot of information on the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. They did a big report published in 2006. This is an idea, this is a picture of where all the residential schools were across the country. And so, it's quite a lot. So we're constantly trying to battle stereotypes. A couple of years ago, there was a faculty that they announced they were going to do a travel-themed frosh. And of course, it was met with a lot of resistance, and they were, at the last minute, they changed it. It's bizarre. I've been invited by my own friends to Cowboys and Indians parties. What the heck am I supposed to do, Obviously, I'm going to be the cowboy. You see a lot of examples, in way clothes are marketed. There's a lot of native imagery and symbolism that's been co-opted, and now it's marketed as fashionable. You see like Navajo prints, headdresses. There's a lot of cartoons. Anytime there's a story on Navajo, not the Gazette and the CBC, I love reading the comics because you really see how racist people still are today. It's a visceral, deeply disturbing experience, but it keeps me aware. I don't encounter racism all that often. A lot of people don't know what I am. I tend to blend a lot of places. But you really see that, wow, it still exists. Anyway, this blog here, McGill law student who is a Métis from out in, she's from Manitoba, Saskatchewan. She's really good. She's got a lot of followers, definitely worth looking into. She's got a lot of strong points that she makes, and she's a really good artist too. She's a performer. I highly encourage you to go to her website to see her work. So finally, touching on Aboriginal education. It's just really important to lay out a foundation for you, for anybody that we're doing a presentation with. Like I said, we did this for law, and they're just like you. Nobody knows. They know a lot more about the Indian Act and the residential school story, but so many people don't. So it's important to give a foundation. Just a few points about education in Canada. So basically, a third of Aboriginal people don't complete high school, or have not completed. I've been up north in Quebec to schools, talked to the vice principal at one community, and they didn't even have one graduate for the last 3 years. I was like, wow, you don't have, nobody graduates high school? How does this happen? Even going up north, I've been up to Sheffield a couple of times. None of the kids there know anybody from that community who's been to the university. So for a lot of people, it's just not on anybody's radar, That's where people like myself and the team we work with at the First People's House really come in to be a role model. And we also involve a lot of McGill students to be involved as well, because they need to be able to imagine themselves, in an institution like McGill or any other school. We have in 2026, so kids who are already alive today, when they're expected to enter the labor market, there's going to be 600,000 of them. That's a lot of kids. Most of them move into trades or colleges as opposed to universities. And we need 65,000 more graduates from post-secondary programs a year to achieve equity with the Canadian population. That's a big number. I mean, I'm a recruiter, and our numbers here at McGill are slowly creeping up. You know, we had about 24 incoming a couple of years ago, and this year we have at least 30 incoming, so the number is slowly rising. Our goal, we aspire to have maybe 100 coming in a year that actually register and income. But you know, a lot of the average people don't have degrees, and from the get-go, maybe I should spend a little bit more time, since you guys are really looking into is education. So, okay. I definitely want to provide you guys a copy of this. I believe this is from the Assembly of First Nations. And I will include it. I mean, I always love my presentations, but basically a child's education tuition is funded between $2,000 to $3,000 less than for a child off of a reserve school. So any other Canadian, that school gets $2,000 to $3,000 more per student than on reserve. So from the beginning, if you're on a reserve, I was actually school on a reservation in the United States. It was a lot lower in terms of the academic achievements and attainments. Like my parents took me and my sisters out when I was grade 5, and I was like already 2 years behind in that. So definitely went off the res to get a better education, was the case. It's been improving now. I mean, I'm 36 years old. I think the general rates where I grew up are improving. The federal government provides this particular child here $0 in funding for computers, software, and teacher training. 0. 88% of children do not have access to early childhood programming. That's a lot. 3,000 qualified high school graduates are denied access to post-secondary education every year due to lack of funding. It's true. There's a cap on funding that the federal government gives to First Nations communities for post-secondary services. It was capped at 2% a year, even though inflation and tuition has been increasing more. It's just not been keeping on par. So from the beginning all the way through university, that's the biggest problem. And as a recruiter trying to bring in students who've been offered admission, that's the #1 issue. McGill doesn't really give a lot of money. And so these students can't come. They're like, oh, I want to come to McGill, it's McGill! But they can't afford it. And they're not interested in taking loans. As we all know, at least in the United States, like student loan debt has surpassed credit card debt in the US. It's crazy. So there's a lot going on to really lobby the government to increase the funding. I mean, it's been going on for a few years. Let me see if there's anything. Yeah, this is a nice little pamphlet that they had put out, so I definitely want to make sure you guys had it for your whatever documents you guys need. Okay, so I don't want to forget to show you this. Okay, so TD, the bank, has a good, they've put out a lot of reports. They've put out 3 reports. One is called Aboriginal People in Canada. There are 2 others. There's special reports. One is debunking myths surrounding Canada's Aboriginal population and estimating the size of the Aboriginal market in Canada. Because it's gotten on a lot of people's radars that we are fastest growing demographic. We're a young population. going to be able to fill the shortage gap. I mean, if we get these kids trained with the coming labor shortage, with all the baby boomers moving into retirement. I mean, I also have responsibilities with CAPS. So I go to these conferences with members from CAPS, and it's interesting to see. So specifically, we belong to the Canadian Association of Career Educators and Employers, and you go to these conferences and hear companies having to go find labor in the Philippines and how expensive it is to bring them over and train them and house them. Well, we have all these people who are needing to be trained and have access to education and jobs to be able to fill those needs. It's kind of funny that it still doesn't make, the links still don't happen at different levels of industry. The Center for, the Study of Living Standards put out a report, 2009, as you can see. By closing the education gap, we can achieve in one generation, almost over $400 billion, okay, added to the GDP, and reducing government expenditures by closing the education gap. This is what they estimate, $77 billion, and with the tax rate being $39 billion, like, that's a lot of money to be saving, to really get these Aboriginal people into the labor market. But yeah, the gap actually is growing, as it turns out. Unfortunately, I think it's one in, let's see, it's either 1 in 5 or 1 in 9 Canadians can expect to achieve in post-secondary education. But for First Nations people, it's like 1 in 33, and the gap is growing. So we're trying to do what we can all across the country. So the Association of Universities and Colleges in Canada has identified top 10 challenges for Aboriginal education. So these are them kind of articulated in 4 themes. Like I was mentioning, I'll put this in. So financial needs, they're very big. Here at McGill, the first People's House came into existence in 1997. So that was a huge step. My older sister went to McGill for undergraduate and graduate programs, and thought she was the only Native person here because she never saw anybody. There was no dedicated space. So now we have the first People's House, and we do a lot to really make sure the students who are here get all the needs they might need taken care of, connect with the right people. We help them find money, and that's one of the biggest things. Is just the funding. So that's just where I come in, I guess, helping to prepare the youth to think about higher education. We certainly are getting a lot more participants every year. We communicate with schools in the Montreal area and beyond, where there are Aboriginal students both on reserve and off reserve. We do a lot of events, like yesterday we had a group of high school students here in these 2 rooms doing workshops with law, education. We had the director of admissions come. We have a dedicated Aboriginal admissions officer. They came to talk with the high school students. And we do that. We have an outreach program every year during the powwow. We do a few events throughout the year. Our main one is the Eagle Spirit Camp, like I mentioned. Just to really sensitize the kids and have them meet other Native students who are here at McGill, talk to professors, talk to admissions people, just to like really demystify the experience. In terms of the Aboriginal community and culture, what we do here is make sure that we're reflecting as much as we can that it's an open. We're open. We're doing everything we can to welcome Aboriginal people, applicants, staff, faculty, whatever it is. We partner a lot with groups in the city to make sure that we know where they can find services in the city, like childcare. a lot of people, like I said, have families young. A lot of our students come with families. In one case, a woman came from Iqaluit with 8 kids. She did her bachelor's in social work, completed it, and moved back to Iqaluit. So, these are some of the identified challenges. And we're, like I said, we've been trying to do what we can to really meet those challenges. So, for those who are status Indians and Inuit beneficiaries, they get financial assistance, and it's, they have a funding formula for the First Nations Postsecondary Student Program, and then each community makes their own rules. So, for example, the amounts can vary from community to community what they'll pay. For my tribe in the United States, I only got like $3,000 a year. But from my First Nation in Canada, like they'll fund the whole, thing. So it's different. It really is varied for every person trying to access their funds through this program. It lists what it covers, but it's never really enough for most people. So these are some more numbers of those who are denied, even though they have status, and they should be eligible for funding, but just weren't able to access it. I guess there's a trend of moving toward a loan program by the government. Of course, that's met with lots of resistance. Can't really change the rules after all this time, I guess. Government does have a fiduciary obligation to First Nations people. Yeah.
Do you know how many were actually allowed funding or provide funding? Or usually on a yearly basis, how many are?
Actually, that's a good question. I'm not sure how much it maxes out. So First Nation schools on reserve educate over 71,000 students a year. So there's a lot of students who are off reserve. So that number doesn't include them. Oh, so 71,000 is actually 60% of all First Nation students attending school. So there's well over 100,000 students per year. Yeah, so that's, I'll have to look into that to find that information because I'm not sure if I was ever aware of it. So what we're doing at McGill, just like another recap of what has been going on. They've created a program of education to allow students from those northern communities to come to Montreal to get certified to become teachers in their own communities. They have, I think, 9 different certificate programs, and you can get a couple different bachelor programs. There's, at the MAC campus, there's a Center for Indigenous Nutrition and the Environment. Like I was mentioning, the First People's House came online in 1997. McGill has an Aboriginal Affairs work group, so that's comprises faculty members, the Dean of Students, the chair, and a few partners that we have across the university to really know what's going on and mobilize all of our resources and help affect change across the institution. There's an Aboriginal admissions procedure, so anybody who self-identifies as an Aboriginal applicant I usually get in touch with them. There's another person that works with me to really work with the applicants to make sure they have all their documents. They are allowed, they're permitted under this policy procedure to write a written statement outlining, I mean, there's whatever they really, however they want to really best position themselves for the admissions committee. That way they're more holistically reviewed than just their code R or their overall average or just the number of GPA. My position started in 2008, so essentially doing a lot of outreach and promotion. It's higher education and recruitment. There's an Aboriginal field course in Ganawage. We have an elder, an official McGill elder, who just started with us about a year ago. There's another student support group at the social work, School for Social Work. It's called Indigenous Access McGill. The Quebec First Nations Medicine Program reserves 4 seats. So members of Quebec First Nations who are interested in going to medical school, there's 4 medical schools in Canada, Quebec. 4 seats a year are reserved for members of those at any of those institutions. They don't get taken, they roll over to the next year. So I know last year there were 11 spots reserved, and they have to be 11 applicants. I'm not really sure if any of them, what the outcome was, but it's getting more and more known. Certainly we want to build capacity in communities for healthcare, like medicine, nursing, physical therapy, occupational therapy, dentistry. We have a summer writing course with the School for Continuing Studies called the Aboriginal Pathways. We also have, like I mentioned, the Eagle Spirit Camp, Eagle Spirit High Performance Camp. The Aboriginal Sustainability Project puts on the Awareness Week that's happening next week. We have created these scarves. There's a photo, the first photo I had of students with the provost, Anthony Massey, was, the first year was last year. The students can get the scarves before convocation and actually wear them across the stage. So that took a few years to get that approved, but now they are allowed to wear it. It's really nice recognition. We also have a course that's started with the School for Continuing Studies. It's an online course. So McGill's very slow off the mark to getting online courses out in the open. And we're starting with Aboriginal people. There's an entrepreneur course happening, and it's meant to be for more northern remote community members who are needing these basic skills. They have a foundation in mathematics, for example. I have to put it on the list here, but it's brand new. Like I said, this is the first semester that it's being offered. We have a handful of people in the first cohort. So it's nice that we as McGill can offer something to Aboriginal learners who don't even ever need to come to campus. It's specifically for Aboriginal people. Besides the pathways, that and the pathways course, those are opportunities for older adult learners who don't have even like a high school diploma or a CJEP, let alone the required education to come to McGill programs. They still can access McGill training. So that's kind of a good thing to be aware of. So we have only about 0.04% of the student body at McGill. Not everybody self-identifies, and that's everybody's choice. We like to know where they're from. We do a verification process. We always get people from Malaysia, Japan, some African countries, the Middle East, ticking the, I am Aboriginal. Everybody's indigenous to some part of the globe, obviously. But for our purposes, we frame it in a North American context, so Canada, the United States. We have the official designation, First Nations, Inuit and Métis, but we also have a lot of students who are, like I said, non-status. So they don't qualify, but we still count them. We have a lot of women students in all disciplines representing coast to coast to coast, providing a lot of diversity at the First People's House. These are just some of the examples. There's Indigenous Law Students Association. There's the Aboriginal Health Interest Group. We have an athlete who is on the hockey team. We had first law graduate. He just finished his degree last year. He's the first one from Inuit. My older sister is a doctor. She went here. We have lawyers, lots of leaders. So we definitely want to foster more Aboriginal Indigenous leadership here at McGill University. Oh, so this was an activity we did for the law. We had provided scenarios that people can discuss. It's meant to be walking in someone else's shoes, if you say moccasins. And these are some of the experiences that we've heard from students here. Like I said, a lot of them come from northern communities. Some are from inner city, like from Toronto, Vancouver. But those who are from, who grew up on the land, they often feel loneliness, disconnection, just being in a big city. Being made the token Indian, like whenever there's anything in a class that the professor happens to be discussing, sometimes they'll call on the one native person, like to be the expert. Some people don't like being made the expert. Looking the part or not. I mean, there's so many people who are Aboriginal, but you wouldn't even tell. You wouldn't even be able to tell by the way they look. I mean, you could be from Ganawagin, like my own half-sister's half-sister does not at all look typically Native, which completely is, the way she talks, grew up there. So you can't go by the physical traits anymore as identifying anybody as an Aboriginal. There's so many jokes and little things that are people take offense to, but they seem like really innocuous, light-hearted jokes. So I guess it all plays to the stereotypes, but that's one of the things students feel they experience that occasionally. Having people have felt like they've not had, nobody expects very much out of them in some situations. I mean, we do a lot. We try to make sure that there's a lot for the students to make them feel at home here, but sometimes it's a bit much. Other groups are also existing in the university. I mean, we get called a lot to inform a lot of different people about Aboriginal, whatever. So anyway, these are just some of the, I listed some of the experiences the students had here. And from the other spectrum, there's a big range of who knows what on Aboriginal topics. I always get asked, like, how do you want to be called? Like, a First Nations person, or an Indian, or a Mohawk, or Aboriginal, or Indigenous? I mean, I don't really know. I mean, all of those, I call myself all of those, And some people don't want to offend Aboriginal people, so they really tread lightly. But I mean, really, we're all here to learn. We're all here to share. So, of course, we want to be sure you guys are, if you have any questions. I mean, I don't know what time I'm supposed to be stopping for questions.
Whenever you want to wrap up is fine with us. So.
Okay.
You have at least 10 more minutes if you want to go.
Okay. I mean, I just have really a couple more slides, but we're just really here for, besides myself and my team at the First People's House, the Aboriginal Sustainability Project is at SEED. We have Indigenous Access McGill. We have an Aboriginal Resource Center at the Faculty of Education. There's a lot of us around the university, and we're here just to always inform us to the best of our knowledge. We want to be, spreading more awareness. That's why we have the awareness week coming. And just being available for anybody who's got questions. And McGill is, as an institution, is getting a lot more committed, like demonstrated a commitment to increasing access to education for Aboriginal people. What's coming down the pipes, it's been in the process for at least 10 years, is a minor in Aboriginal studies. So people have been wanting that for a long time. It's finally been owned. It needed a foundation course, it needs staffing, it needs dollars. So finally, that's been only, I'm not even sure when it's going to be announced officially, but it's happening, finally, after 10 years. We're actually going to move the Hochelaga Rock to a more visible prominent location. Does anybody know what that is? Yeah. Okay. So that'll be in the spring. We're going to have a big unveiling. We're going to create some new updated language for the plaque. And so there's a lot of mobilization to really indigenize the academy. There's, for example, at School of Medicine, they have Indigenous curriculum. Now it's an elective for all 4 years of medicine, especially for those who are planning to go work up north. There's a huge need for medicine, doctors up north. My sister was, when she finished residency, she was being recruited to go work up there, tax-free for over $400,000 a year. But it's a severe situation up there. I mean, it's really tough. She didn't go because she's got 6 kids. They're all really young, so they need to be down here. So that's nice that medicine is doing that. Anyway, there's just a few, it's slowly happening, but we're doing, as an institution, a lot more than we had historically. So these are just some website, more resources. You can see where we got some of this information. For more information, let's check out. Oh yeah, these are the graduation stars that get presented to all the students, and you can see the high level adults represented. So, sorry if I was all over the place, but thank you for listening to my words, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Did I address some of your?
Yeah, absolutely. That was right on point. We have about 10 minutes for questions, so if anyone wants to start.
Yes.
I have a question about, you said that there are a lot of students who are planning to do it, but then the financial issues causing them not to come and do. Do you have a ballpark figure of like what sort of proportion that is relative to those who to apply? Like, is it like 80% that they can, like they have the grades or they're able to make them separate grades or
Well, I mean, we had, I don't know, like, last year, 4 students, they accepted, but then they had to, like, decline because this wasn't happening financially. I don't know at the top of my head right now for those who have started. We have about 30. So we have a new Aboriginal student advisor who started earlier this year. And so she works with me. I mean, I recruit the students, I help them with the Aboriginal admissions protocol. And those who are self-identified, like the advisor and myself, I mean, there were 175 who self-identified this year. We go through the list and we contact all of them. It's a lot of work. Phone-a-thon. And so for those who get offered admission and want to accept, but can't, like, they usually have to tell us that they want to accept the offer, but they can't financially. I don't know what the true situation is. They always have to tell us what the reasons are. But the advisor's been handling more of those, like, we have a handoff system going. So she works with them. From those who accept the offer, she takes and considers, she works with those guys, and then she hands them off to Paige, who's the coordinator of the first meeting. So there's 3 of us who are working with any given applicant who accepts their offer. So all that to say, like, I don't know, we're still like crunching the numbers from this last admission cycle. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, when you go to these elementary schools and high schools and for outreach, what's the reception like from the administration there and also from the students?
The administrators are usually really happy. You go to the schools, and the students themselves are really shy. Nobody asks any questions. You have to be animated and like just go, and always pause for moments if anybody has any questions. Yeah, schools are really it's pretty unique. It's like for the schools around here, especially on the reserve, like we go regularly, and I've been out across the country though to visit schools like one time, and they all usually want to invite me back, but I have a small budget, so I can't really. I'd like to go back ideally. That's the key is to have consistency with those kinds of visits. Usually I do a little presentation because I work with CAPS. We developed some presentations for youth to explore what it is to be looking for a career down the road. So I can deliver those too, but yeah, it's pretty positive, and everybody welcomed it. Somebody up there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if McGill is one of the few universities that has such a outreach program that you've been doing, or is it kind of consistent across Canada?
No, I mean McGill's really, really slow off the mark, like with all the other research-based universities it compares itself to in terms of student services for Aboriginal people, recruitment. But the outreach is really, I would say, it's pretty unique. Like I travel with the Aboriginal Postsecondary Education program. I'm gonna pull it up. And so these are schools that are colleges and institutes and universities in Ontario. And so they have a full schedule. So these are all the native recruiters from schools, colleges, whatever. They have a 10-week schedule where they go traveling throughout. It's all Ontario, and they come into Quebec because a lot of Aboriginal communities here are Anglophone and tend to go to their schools. So I've talked with a lot of them, and a lot of them are only doing recruitment. Only a handful are doing any sort of outreach, like on campus. But in terms of traveling out across the country, it's really unique. I don't know any other school who does it. In the States, I know Stanford and Harvard, and let's see. I know those two schools who actually go out into communities all across the country. But in Canada, I'm not really sure. So these are the universities. I only know that Humboldt College, which is in the college section, they have a little camp like we have. I know Queens and Trent were interested in doing something that we do in terms of the Eagle Spirit High Performance Camp. But yeah, it's pretty unique. I mean, it was kind of the vision of a few people to actually go out and do outreach. I mean, we've had 2 focus groups in 2007 and 2009 with Aboriginal community members, so post-secondary counselors, education directors, principals. We're going to have one in November. And I think those initial discussions led to the creation of the outreach component. So it's nice to have support and the money to travel and to do outreach visits. Anybody else? Yeah.
It seems like for all the changes that you said, everything's very slow, it's very gradual. Do you think, are there any projects in place right now or any initiatives that have kick-started? And if there isn't, kick-start a series of change, and if there isn't, what do you think needs to happen for that to happen?
We have lofty aspirations. We want to create, we've been trying to create a minor. We want to create a major. It would be nice to have an institute. I mean, McGill is a leader in research. Most diverse student body in Canada, but lowest in terms of Aboriginal students. We also would like to have an Aboriginal secretariat, somebody who could be the point person for all things Aboriginal at McGill, who will inform the higher levels of administration on what steps we're going to be taking. And right now, there is the document, it's a strategic research plan. It's been in the works for the last 2 years. So faculty, students, staff have all informed this committee. They're going to be submitting a document to the federal government. And it outlines all of their research priorities. And it's been submitted to the McGill community for comment and review. So I'm working right now with a group of people to submit feedback for that document, because like I said, it outlines where they're going to spend all the research money from 2013 to 2016. There's nothing, not one thing that says anything about Aboriginal or Indigenous anything at all. So we're trying to get that, the comments are being taken until the 26th of September. So that's one thing we're doing to really make sure it's on their radar. Like, hey, look, we have this new miners coming online. There's a lot of McGill mobilization on trying to map out where all the research interests are intersecting in the north, especially with Plant North coming into effect. And a lot of Aboriginal communities too are mobilizing because they don't, they want to be well informed if any resources are being started or infrastructure is coming through their territories. So there's a lot of reasons to make sure that research resources get allocated to creating more Aboriginal expertise. So that's like one thing that's happening right now. It's a really timely situation. And in fact, we're going to be sending it through our networks to get people to sign electronically. You got a question?
Yeah, I was just thinking, how many university institutions in Canada have Aboriginal studies programs?
Field study programs?
Or not just like programs in general, like assuming a major or
there's an intern with Seed who he's been hired by SMOO actually to do a scan of what courses that have any Aboriginal topics or anything to do with Aboriginal people are at McGill. Because, like I said, it's been a process for 10 years to make it minor. And so he's been doing a scan of universities across Canada that have programs. And I don't have his report with me. I was just looking at it a little while ago. And I don't even know off the top of my head how many to do.
Is it a lot of?
At a lot of smaller colleges, there's a lot of, you can do some sort of Aboriginal specialty for typically already a diploma, where there are higher numbers. Like in Quebec, we're only 1% of the population of Quebec. There's 11 nations where 1%, like our population is 1% is Aboriginal. But like out west, like in the Plains, it's like more like 6 or 7%. So I would say they probably have a lot, but not at the university level. I'm sure the University of Alberta has that major minor. I'm sure British Columbia, UBC has that. University of Toronto has that. McGill doesn't. So, I would say that relatively a lot of schools will come to it.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Anyone else?
Thank you so much again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah.